remember yesterday we were looking at the Emperor Domitian. And what do you remember about Domitian? And what stands out?
He was murdered by his wife.
Not Domitian. We haven't gotten to his death yet, I don't think. But plus, that wouldn't be true. You're thinking of Claudius, maybe? Matthew, is that what you're thinking of?
I think it was one of those.
Domitian?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I didn't remember that it was his wife. Okay. Oh yeah, you're right. He was murdered by his wife. All right, sorry about that. Whenever I think of Emperor being murdered by his wife, I always think of Claudius. Okay, what else do you remember about Domitian? What's he known for? Persecuting Christians, killing Christians. Nero did, Domitian did.
Being very
paranoid. In part because he knew, apparently from the astrologers, when he was going to die. And I was telling you about that yesterday. So let's jump back into the story. Remember, he tried to disprove astrology by having an astrologer tell him when the astrologer was going to die, or how he was supposed to die, and then he killed him so he wouldn't die that way. But then it turned out that the prediction came true anyway. The night before the day that was predicted that he would die, he slept very badly, as you might imagine, jumping out of bed in terror at midnight, because that's the beginning of the day. But he also knew the hour. At dawn, he had the astrologer, I won't try to give you his name, an astrologer brought before him. The astrologer fearlessly reaffirmed his prediction that Domitian would die that morning during the 5th hour. Domitian condemned him to death, but delayed the execution until the evil hour had come and gone, so that the astrologer would die knowing that he was a fraud. By this time, the conspirators that were plotting his death already had been lying about what time it was to Domitian. When the 4th hour sounded, they told him that it was the dreaded 5th. Domitian, in a state of nervous agitation, picked at a festering wart on his forehead. When he noticed it had begun to bleed, he said, "I hope that this is all the blood required." When the silvery sound of the trumpet finally announced a new hour, he double-checked what hour it was. One of the conspirators, who, like Domitian, were watching the clock, confirmed that it was the 6th. Immensely relieved that the dreaded 5th hour had passed and so little of his blood spilled, Domitian headed for his bath, perhaps relishing the prospect of executing the false prophet afterwards. On the way, another conspirator told him that there was momentous news that he needed to reveal in private. The news was that this was not the 6th hour, but the 5th. And Domitian's time had come. When they were alone, he stabbed the emperor. Now, what really makes this even crazier is that at that very moment, all the way over in Ephesus, you know where Ephesus is? Modern-day Turkey. The Apostle Paul ministered there for 3 years. The book of Ephesians is written to them, way over there. But they're a city also known for its astrologers. And there was an astrologer and a miracle worker whose name was Apollonius, who had cast the horoscopes of emperors from Nero to Nerva, appeared to wake from a trance of divine inspiration. So he was in a trance, apparently getting revelation from somewhere. Then, as if the heavens had opened to him, he declared in a loud voice to his audience, "Bravo! Smite the bloodthirsty wretch! You have struck, you have wounded, you have slain." Now that happened at the same time that Domitian was getting killed. The fact that the astrologer Proculus first announced his prediction in Germany, which got him sent to Rome in chains, and that Apollonius was aware of the same evil hour in Asia Minor, makes it clear that the prediction's web was spread far beyond the imperial palace. As suggested by Suetonius' comment and Vespasian's cruel dinner quip, which relates to something earlier, it is quite possible that the hex or the curse had been common knowledge for at least 17 years. For Vespasian had died in 79. So, I don't know what you make of that. I generally don't believe in astrology, but if they had information about something that was going to happen and were somehow involved in knowing what was happening, if they were getting supernatural knowledge, they weren't getting it from God, right? So it may be that these astrologers had spirits that were in contact with them, and that may be how they knew these things. Well, at the death of Domitian, the Senate appointed their own man to the throne, who was an elderly, well-respected statesman by the name of Nerva. He was opposed by the Praetorian Guard, and he trained the great soldier Trajan to assume power after him. So Nerva doesn't really count in our list because he essentially just was there for a time to train the next emperor, who was Trajan. Under Trajan, and by the way, Trajan was a Spaniard, of all things, the first non-Italian to serve as emperor. The Roman Empire, under his leadership, reached its greatest extent, expanding into northern Romania and into Armenia to the east and Mesopotamia to the east. He also built impressive aqueducts, roads, theaters, and basilicas. So he was quite the builder and expanded the kingdom or the empire even further to its greatest extent. And he is considered to have been a great emperor. So nothing too bad to say about Trajan. Here's what Pliny the Elder said: "We are suffering no longer. There is no need to flatter him as a god," because that's the previous emperors all wanted to be called a god, right? And Pliny the Younger says, not Trajan. He doesn't want everybody to think of him as a god. "We speak not about a tyrant, but a fellow citizen, not a master, but a parent. He is one of us, and remembers that though he rules over men, he is himself a man." In other words, not a god who deserves the obedience of everybody. So, sounds like Trajan was a pretty decent guy. Any questions about Trajan? Here is the expanse of the Roman Empire under Trajan. So I said all the way over here to Mesopotamia, Armenia, up to Romania. Of course, Britain had already been a part, so very large area, very large empire. All right, following Trajan is Hadrian. Hadrian was a cousin of Trajan and a fellow soldier. He broke with a long-standing tradition of not wearing a beard. You see here, he has a beard. None of the other emperors had a beard. His first move within hours of coronation was to withdraw the troops from Mesopotamia, present-day Iraq, and to fortify the empire's boundaries by building walls in northern England and others in the Danube and Rhine valleys in Europe, ushering a new era of peace. So he is known for his walls. Hadrian's Wall, it's called, is in Britain to separate England from the Picts, which are the people of Scotland. Was not able to see Hadrian's Wall when I was in Scotland. I was told that it's just a stone wall, nothing really big. But here's a picture of it. I wish I could have seen it. But here's a picture of Hadrian's Wall. You can see it. I mean, it's still there in some places, and how far it extends. And I will say this about the Scots. They do like to build stone walls. We saw lots of stone walls, just not that one. And here's the location between England and Scotland. Here's a close-up. You can see how that would prevent invasion from other forts. You certainly can't get horses through there. You have to climb over. It takes some effort. We'll get to this in a minute. Just a lot of other information about Hadrian. Hadrian had a male consort. You know what I mean by that? Yeah, boyfriend. Who accompanied him on his travels around the empire. There's a poem written on papyrus featuring the two men hunting together. Memorials. He put up a memorial to his dead lover. It was not uncommon for his predecessors, other emperors before him, also had taken gay lovers alongside a female spouse. But Hadrian was unique in making his love for this man official in a way that no other emperor before him had. So other emperors had boyfriends along with girls and their wives, but Hadrian made it official. His lover's name was Antonius, and he drowned under mysterious circumstances. When that happened, Hadrian was so distraught that he chose to commemorate this young Greek man by naming an Egyptian city in his honor. What was unusual in Hadrian's attitude towards Antonius was the way in which he publicly deified him. In public, he made him into a god. He had to marry, and he had a politically arranged marriage to a lady by the name of Sabina, who was the great niece of the former Emperor Trajan, which in effect set up his succession as being in the line of emperors. But clearly it was a loveless marriage with no children. What is unusual is that he had a lot of flings, a lot of sexual encounters, and then after his lover drowned in the Nile, he made him a god. The other thing that Hadrian is known for is putting down the Jewish revolt in Jerusalem with great brutality. You know that there was a revolt of the Jewish people in the late 60s into 70, 72 that was put down by Vespasian and Titus. Well, years later, the Jews revolted again. And Hadrian was the emperor then. He put down this revolt, which is pictured here. It's called the Second Jewish Revolt, or the Bar Kokhba Revolt, and those are the years, 132 to 136 AD, also known as the Second Jewish Roman War. It was led by Simon Bar Kokhba, a man many believe to be the Messiah. So this is over 100 years after Jesus Christ, and there's this man who comes and says he is Messiah, and people are following him because now here's somebody who's doing what many people thought Jesus would do, and that is lead them against Rome, right? But that revolt was put down very brutally. There were so many Jews sold into slavery as a result of Hadrian's defeat of them. So many Jews were sold into slavery that the price for a Jewish slave fell to the same as that of a horse. So when you glut the market with product, the price goes down. And from that time on, Jews never really had a presence in Israel, Palestine until the 20th century. There were always some around, but eventually they were forced to leave the Jerusalem and the area, and were not allowed to live there. During his reign, Hadrian traveled throughout his empire, built many walls, as we said. The one in northern England is the most famous. Hadrian is also remembered for standardizing Roman law. So he did some good things for the empire, was deviant in his sexual behavior, and was very brutal in how he treated the Jewish people. But from the Roman standpoint, he was a good emperor. Next, after Hadrian, we come to Antonius Pius. Are you familiar with the word pious? You ever heard the word pious before? Yes? No? No? If someone is pious, that usually refers to the fact that they are very religious. So, was Antonius Pius a very religious person? Well, he got that title because of his religious desire to have Hadrian made into a god. They called him Pius for that reason. Hadrian had adopted Antonius as his son and heir. So because he wanted the Senate to deify Hadrian, they called him Antonius Pius. He had a long and prosperous reign and was succeeded by joint emperors, two ruling together, Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus. So the thing to remember about Antonius Pius is he wanted to make Hadrian a god. Not much else to say about him. Okay, next we come to Marcus Aurelius, who was the last of the so-called good emperors, although we've seen even the good emperors were evil in some ways. He ruled together with Lucius Verus for 8 years, when Verus died, leaving Aurelius to rule alone. Again, he had an evil side too, because he also brutally persecuted Christians. His reign also saw an increasing number of interior rebellions within the empire and attacks on the borders. So there's more unrest in the empire and from outside the empire. So he spent much of his reign securing the frontiers against barbarian invasions. He was also known as the Philosopher King. He was a Stoic philosopher. He wrote a book called Meditations, and I'll tell you some things that he said in a moment. He ended up dying of the plagues in 180 and was succeeded by his son, Commodus. Have any of you ever seen the movie Gladiator? No? It used to be a very popular movie. Well, if you ever do see it, they talk about Commodus being the emperor then, and that's who this is, the son of Marcus Aurelius. And he's really considered the one who begins to oversee the decline of the Roman Empire. He was thoroughly unfit to rule. His reign was marked by despotism, licentiousness, very loose living, and brutality. In a lot of ways, it sounds like some of the other emperors, except he wasn't that great of an administrator, apparently, compared to the others. He was strangled in 192, and that's followed by a long period of short, violent reigns marked by constant court intrigues. And so that's really the end of the Roman emperors, per se, and the end of Pax Romana. So Marcus Aurelius is the last true emperor in the sense of someone who ruled well. And that brings us to the end of the emperors. Let's look at a couple of things that Marcus Aurelius said. At least one thing. That which is not good for the beehive cannot be good for the bee. Does that make sense? How would you apply that to humans? What's he saying? It's not good for the beehive, it's not good for the bee. You can apply that in a lot of ways. If it's not good for the family, it's not good for anybody in the family, right? If it's not good for the country, it's not good for the people in the country. See, so that's a wise saying that you can use in a lot of different ways. All right, Diocletian rules from 284 to 305. You kind of have to look back at Diocletian, remember him? This is where we're going to start looking at some of the events, and we'll have to look back periodically for the emperors as we look at Roman culture and achievement. Rome had a century of chaos following the death of Marcus Aurelius. I'm not sure why I have Diocletian there. We don't really need to know him there. Diocletian was the first emperor in 100 years to properly restore order and end the violence. I'm sorry. Okay. Diocletian wasn't before. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up with another emperor. Yeah, this comes after Marcus Aurelius. So Diocletian is considered an emperor who restores things following Commodus. He's an absolute ruler who ended all personal liberties. He increased the bureaucracy for more effective administration, divided the empire into two administrative realms, East and West. So he divided the Roman Empire into two parts, Eastern Roman Empire and Western Roman Empire, as a way to better administrate the empire. This was the first step in creation of what would become two separate empires. Eventually, it becomes a Western Empire and an Eastern Empire. So Diocletian is our 13th emperor. Cut her off a little short by ending with Commodus. We've got Diocletian there as well. Okay, any questions about Diocletian? We also should mention Diocletian persecuted Christians. So it's become kind of standard fare for the emperors once Christianity becomes more established, especially after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD, when Christians are recognized as a separate group from the Jewish people. There are times when Christianity is persecuted, and primarily because they refuse to acknowledge the emperor as a god. They refuse to worship the other gods besides Jesus. Their cry is, Jesus is Lord, rather than Caesar is Lord, which is what they were supposed to say. All right, let's see if we can think of some things we've talked about. The dates for the Roman Empire, Roman Republic, Roman Empire, we don't need to learn the dates. Okay, the Latin phrase primus inter pares. Anybody remember what that is? It was used of Caesar Augustus, first of all. Okay, let's try to remember what some of these Latin roots mean. Primus means what? Or prime means what? If something is prime, you're familiar with the word prime. You've heard prime time. You've heard of prime meat. So what is prime? No, meat. Prime meat is not just what's available. Prime meat is what meat? You got a prime cut of meat. What is that? Not the main part. What? The best part. The number one part. prime time television is the best time. That's the time when they can charge the most for commercials. It's the number one time. So what's primus mean? Number one, first. Inter. You know the prefix inter. We have in inter. What do we have? Intercontinental. What's the other word with inter? I'm drawing a blank. Inter has the idea of being within or among. Okay, so Caesar was first among pares,
Citizens.
or
People.
equals. He's first among equals. Because everybody said it was supposed to be equal. But Caesar was first among equals. He was the prime among the equals. Okay, let's see. The accomplishments of Augustus, let's go. What is Pax Romana? Okay, let's see if we can answer that one. What is Pax Romana?
Yes.
Stephen? Right. The peace of Rome. How do Caligula and Nero represent the problems of hereditary succession? Hereditary succession doesn't work. Why? Why sometimes doesn't it work? Looking at the lives of Caligula and Nero. What's wrong with the idea that whoever's ruling, that their son should become the next ruler? Or in these cases, they didn't have a son, they picked, somebody else was picked to be the ruler.
They were unfit for the job.
Yeah, right, they were unfit. Okay, and we haven't really gone over this too much yet, so we'll do more of that later. Okay, let's see, we have some time now to go into Roman culture and achievement. That should be next in your notes. The thing to remember about Rome is that they borrowed, they copied, they modified, and they preserved many elements of the cultures that she encountered. Rome was not very original. Rome had a hard time coming up with their own ideas. They just copied from others and improved on what others did. But they were copiers. Now, one area that they did have a contribution was in the area of law. The Roman contribution to law was that all citizens should have equal rights before the law. So that was a contribution of the Romans, that all citizens should have equal rights before the law. Now, let's look at some of other areas of culture. So looking at literature and language. One of the people that we should look at is under the area of historical writings, and that is Cicero. Cicero was a scholar, an author, and a statesman, as well as being a lawyer. In fact, he was considered the greatest orator or speaker of his day, and he was a master of Latin prose poetry. One of the things, and he's called, in fact, called the father of Latin prose. He was such a good writer. One of the quotations that we get from Cicero that you may have heard is, "While there's life, there's hope." You ever heard something like that? Where there's life, there's hope. That comes from Cicero. The next historical writer you might be surprised at is Julius Caesar. And primarily, this is from his commentaries on the Gallic Wars. Remember, he was in charge of the area of Gaul and was fighting up there and writing about his exploits and sending them back to Rome, and became quite popular in Rome because of what he had written as the general of the Roman armies up in Gaul. The next person who was an historical writer was Livy. Livy wrote a lengthy history of Rome, from the beginnings to Augustus. and this was called the Annals. It was 142 volumes. Can you imagine? 142 volume history of Rome from the beginning, Romulus and Remus, up through Augustus. All right, we got these three historical writers. Any questions about any of them? I'm sure you've heard the name Cicero before. You've heard of Julius Caesar. Livy you may not have heard of, but he is well known in history. And then there's also Plutarch, who is an historical writer. He wrote something called Parallel Lives. This is an interesting work because he compares Greek and Roman heroes. So he talks about the Greek heroes, from like Homer, and then compared it to Roman heroes, and sort of has them side by side here to compare them. He also wrote Moralia, which is a collection of essays on customs and mores, customs and things that are part of people's ethics. In addition to Plutarch, we have another historical writer, and that is Tacitus. Tacitus was an historian who favored the old republic over life under the self-centered emperors, and you can see why, probably, if you haven't gone through these emperors. He had a work, Annals, which was a valuable but pessimistic history of Rome from the death of Augustus to the reign of Nero. He also wrote something called Germania, about the Germanic tribes, and he wrote annals and histories about the emperors of his time. So we have a lot of information from Tacitus. Tacitus is one of the Roman writers who mentions Jesus. So we know he was aware of him, and other facts that come into play with the progress of Christianity and so on, we know from Tacitus. All right, so Plutarch and Tacitus add to our list of historical writers. All right, when we come back tomorrow, we will look at poets. The Roman poets. Okay, make sure you're looking over this material each evening. We've had a lot of emperors that you need to keep straight. Now we've had a few authors that we need to know something about. So look them over. As I've said before, explain what we have been covering to someone else, and then you're more likely to remember it. Any questions?